please like and subscribe. At night, when the sky is filled with brightly shining stars just outside what appears to be a castle, we see massive destruction like there was just a battle. Suddenly, a hand emerges from the rubble, and the man underneath pulls himself out. A voice talks about how a star that doesn't shine in the highest peaks of the night sky and is stuck under the ditches where nobody looks is still a star, if it wishes to shine and still embraces light in its heart. Clearly, they're referring to the man who just rose out of the dirt the man uses his sword to get back to his feet and gasps for air in the cold night. The scene shifts, and we see the man standing in front of a building, staring longingly at the sword placed on a wall. His bright blue eyes gaze at the blade as it sparks like magic, and he talks to himself about how cool the piece is, no matter how many times he looks at it. He's interrupted when a voice calls out to him with an annoyed look on his face. He turns to the person who brought him out of his daydream. The lady, whose name is Seminar, claims that she knew she would find him there. Staring at the sword like usual, we finally learn that the man's name is Vlad, and as Semino wears a condescending look under the interface, she reminds him that he's been lost in thought lately. Hearing this, Vlad gets upset and warns her not to get on his nerves, pointing out that she's currently interrupting one of the few breaks he has. However, Zemina doesn't seem to care if he gets mad and just informs him that his behavior is the reason people have started spreading rumors about him. Flight is shocked he hears that people are talking about him, so he asks her to explain what she means. The girl gets nervous when she realizes that she just accidentally let such sensitive information slip out in her outburst, so rather than answering him, she just looks away from him and changes the topic. Zemina suddenly asks why he still hears voices in his head whenever he picks up a stick. Vlad doesn't reply and just stares into space instead, so she concludes that he still hears voices and curiously wonders what kind of sins he committed in his last life. It appears that for some reason Vlad was struck by lightning on a clear day, and on top of that, it was black lightning. As rare as such occurrences, Zemina advises Vlad to stay cooped up in the shop for a while, claiming that the new bishop is said to be very sensitive about omens and similar stuff. She reveals that he used to work as a heresy inquisitor, and as such, he has a keen eye for supernatural stuff. This puts Wyatt in danger because if the bishop finds him suspicious, he will immediately be sent to the stakes to be burned after hearing what she has to say. Blight is even more downcast because he knows that his life is in danger. He feels bad that she would tell him something like that. But Zemina explains that she only did so because she's worried about him. She reminds him that many people saw him get struck by lightning and reveals it. Since then, they've all been talking about him behind his back. She then advises him one more time to stop showing himself to the public by mopping at the sword all the time because the church could take him away at any time. However, Vlad ignores her counsel and insists that he won't get dragged away like a criminal just because he stares at a sword. He says this while looking at the sword in question. Zemina finally gets fed up, calling him dense and suggesting that he just buy the sword since he likes it so much. As you'd expect, the sword is expensive and way out of Vlad's budget. But when he explains this to her, she claims that it couldn't be that pricey. She believes it's just the work of a back-alley blacksmith and even offers to buy it for him, thinking that she could easily afford it. After a brief pause, Vlad reveals that the sword costs 5 gold, and judging by Zemina's reaction, she finds the price ridiculously high. She doesn't think a stupid piece of metal should cost that much, and she starts to think of all the other things she could get with 5 gold. Vlad smugly helps her finish the thought, pointing out that she wouldn't have to work for a whole year if she had that kind of money to spare. Just then, a voice cuts in and grabs their attention. It's an angry old man who heard Zemina call the pricey sort of stupid metal chunk. The man insults them and tells them to get out of the place. Judging by his outfit, he's a blacksmith, and he didn't take her comment lightly. The angry man tells them that the sword isn't for back-alley kids like them. However, Zemina isn't one to back down from confrontation. She asks the man who would buy the sword if they don't point out that it's being sold in the slums, so only someone living in the slums would end up purchasing it. After making her point, She taunts the old man further by asking if he's out of his mind, rather than being mad about the question. The man is more offended that she called him old, and he gets even more furious at her, claiming that she has no manners. The fearless redhead just makes things worse by suggesting that he only makes swords for knights because he's old and would probably soon kick the bucket. At this point, there's a giant vein. Bulging out of the man's head as he sees red, he snaps at her, claiming that she's correct before calling her a dumb kid and advising her to go back to her shop and do the dishes. Semina finally gets a taste of her own medicine, feeling offended that he called her a kid. She retorts that she's a grown lady, and his tensions start to rise. Vlad takes her away from the argument before things get out of hand. He pulls her out of there, telling her not to get worked up, but Zemina is fuming because she doesn't think she said anything wrong as the two walk away from the old man. He continues to throw insults at them, calling Zemina rotten and full of venom. He thinks back to when she was younger and blames himself for giving her too much food when they had nothing to eat. The old man notices the footprints Vlad left behind and surmises that he was standing there for a long time. He thinks about how Vlad should focus more on making ends meet than daydreaming. The blacksmith takes down the sword and decides that he's going to finally let go and sell it to someone who can make use of it, because he knows that slum kids never grow up to make it out into the world. The blacksmith holds the precious sword, which happens to be his last work, and thinks about how it's just like Vlad because they both shine. Even in a place like the slums zooming out, we get to see the center of the northern economy. It's a place called Soara, and it's regarded as the lighthouse of the northern region thanks to the power of the Bayezid family. Place of Brilliance harbors dark shadows, found in the slums, where all foul things are thrown inside a tavern. We see men drinking wine and chatting with women. The fun is interrupted when a shirtless man pulls a lady by her hair, insulting her for trying to scam him. The woman denies trying to scam him, so he reveals that she tried to sell him fake medicine. He claims that he knows it's fake because he's worked as a mercenary for 20 years. Just then, Vlad arrives at the scene. After hearing the noise, the mercenary identifies him as the candle maker and tells him to go get his madam. Vlad blankly tells him that if he wants to see her, he would need to pay in gold coins rather than silver. Hearing this, the man is enraged that they would demand gold when their business isn't even run properly. He tells Vlad to bring his mom if Madam isn't available and accuses him of scamming him with the candle that measures the time, claiming that it burned down too quickly. Instead, the man gets angrier. So the boy decides that he can prove the candles weren't a scam. He even tells the mercenary that he can do whatever he wants with the woman. If it turns out that they cheated him, the man is reluctant to accept the terms, claiming he can't trust scammers. But Vlad insists and promises to beat the crap out of him. If the candles work fine, his blue eyes begin to glow ominously, and the mercenary gets frightened. He then lights the candle and stands there waiting to see if it goes out before 5 minutes. Sure enough, the candle goes out at 5 minutes mark, and before the merc can know what's happening. The boy hits him straight in the face with his wooden staff as the man falls back. Vlad exclaims that the candles are fine after all and proceeds to kick him in the back and push him into another room. He locked the door behind him and tells the man that he's dead. The terrified mercenary holds his bloody nose and begs Vlad to wait, but the blue-eyed fellow just proceeds to beat the living daylight out of him. He continuously strikes him with the staff for trying to scam the shop, and especially for talking about his mom without respect. The young man beats him so hard that the noises can be heard outside the building. The next morning at breakfast, Vlad tells a man named George that someone messed with their candles. When the madam hears this, she's outraged and wonders who would dare do such a thing. She then assigns Vlad to find the culprit, but he doesn't know how to be confused. He asks her how he can do it. And the madam named Marcella merely reveals that she has already found them. It turns out she was the one who messed with the candles so she could scam the drunkards and make more money. Vlad is dumbfounded thinking about how he beat up the fat mercenary for nothing. As he walks down the stairs, he shrugs off the guilt, believing that he had to do it since he's just an employee. This is when he's approached by a group of men, and the ringleader of the lot commends him for what he did last night. The guy wraps his arm around Vlad's neck and pulls him closer so he can ask him for some money. He heard that Vlad got some tips from selling candles last night and claimed that they needed some money because they're all broke. Vlad snaps at the guy named Burley, and his eyes start to glow once again. Burley teases him, telling him not to get scared and explaining that he's not just asking for money. Upon hearing this, Vlad is perplexed, so Burley reveals that he has something to give him in exchange for some money. Suddenly, he pulls out a little boy by the hair and claims that the kid is a stupid and unskilled pickpocket. Vlad recognizes the kid, and Burley offers to give him back in exchange for 40 silver. Vlad immediately asks about the kid's fingers and ankles, so Burley assures him that he didn't cut them off but only taught the FIFA lesson. Eventually, our hero gives Burley and his goons the silver and then states that they should just kill the pickpockets next time. Our hero thinks about how his dream of acquiring 5 gold has just been postponed once again. Later, Vlad visits a man named Harvin who works for Captain Hoover, more infamously known as the Whale Hunter. He tells the man about Ned and how he didn't lose any fingers. That seems to surprise Harvin, as he recalls the time when he lost his fingers and got his ankles cut for stealing young Vlad, and Semina watched him bleed, and he ended up becoming a public lesson for everyone else. He then reveals that he heard that the candles were messed with, and Vlad is surprised at how much he already knows about that incident. Harvin explains that the rumors have been making the rounds that Marcella is cheating the customers, but he doesn't think she's that kind of person. Floyd claims that he also thinks the same, but reveals that George already seems to know about it. Harvin suggests that even if they were messing with the candles, they would have a very good reason to do so. Perplexed, Vlad asks what reason they could have, and the fingerless man explains that they most likely need money urgently. On that note, he warns Vlad and tells him to be careful because there's only one reason an organization would need to rake in money quickly, and he claims that it must be because they're planning a war against another organization. George the Knight, Black Bear, and the Swine Butcherer, Dice the Gambler, Captain Hoover, the Whale Hunter, and One-Arm Jack the Money Bug. These are the 5 bosses who dominate the slums of Sawara. All the darkness of life now slowly approaches Vlad through the shadows. And this becomes very evident when Moneybug and his gang come to his shop looking for his boss flag. He just stares at him in bewilderment. He can't believe that Moneybug himself would come to the shop. He fixes his gaze on One-Arm, wonders if the preparations for war have already started. He's drawn out of these thoughts by one of Moneybug's subordinates yelling at him. The ponytail guy with a scar on his face calls Vlad a brat for not responding to Moneybug and asks him where his boss is, immediately causing a frown appears on our hero's face, and he tells them that he doesn't know where the boss is because he's just a candle seller. Mr. Ponytail seems to have a very short temper because he insults Vlad again and smashes the table while threatening him. The force from his punch sends the candles flying, but even at that, Vlad remains unfazed. He just stares the guy down, showing that he isn't afraid. The workers, on the other hand, are terrified, especially the ladies watching the entire altercation. They all watch with their jaws on the floor, waiting to see what happens next. Suddenly, Vlad gets on one knee and begins picking up all the expensive candles that fell to the floor and got broken. He even tries to get the ponytail more riled up by suggesting that he's close for the day. Hearing this, the ponytail is visibly irritated and frustrated that the young man keeps ignoring him while picking up the broken candles. He suddenly tells the guy to get his feet away. He finally pushes the guy to his limit, so he tries to kick him while he's on Wendy, but our hero just uses his trusty wooden staff to strike his leg in midair. Ponytail loses his footing, and with bold determination, Vlad lands another powerful strike on his face, sending him falling to the floor, and everyone watches his gob smacked upon seeing it. Moneybug, on the other hand, appears to be amused by his glowing blue eyes. Vlad glares at his defeated opponent and holds the staff against his face, representing Ali's unchangeable rule, which is that the winner stands up high while the loser lies down below. Seeing this money, Bugs's men are outraged that he would do that to their colleague in front of them. They're about to charge him when Moneybug tells them to stop. The boss waves his hook in front of his men, and they're confused as to why he isn't letting them fight. The towering man explains that he actually likes Vlad, and he even proceeds to applaud the candle seller. Even though he has only one hand, he is so impressed that he can't help but clap for Vlad. He implores him to be more understanding of the noise, and the candle seller just replies, saying that he doesn't discriminate against the disabled, rather than getting offended. Moneybug finds the comment hilarious and immediately bursts into laughter. He tells the lad that he would like to have a private chat with him later. The red-eyed boss touches the young boy's face with his hook and asks to be reminded who he took away before, but Vlad just retorts that the person must have died early since he can't remember. Their little exchange is interrupted when one of Moneybug's men calls out to him. Both of them turn around and are surprised to see George and his men standing before them. George teases Moneybug, claiming he would have served him grilled meat if he knew he was coming. But the mountain of a man just dismisses the gesture, reminding George that they're not that close, regardless of whether George regards him as his guest, and suggests that they go upstairs. Jack claims that he would prefer good liquor over meat, so he asks for some to drink. The knight's green eyes glow scarily as he assures the Moneybug that Marcella doesn't disappoint when it comes to hospitality. The intruder's red eyes glow with the same murderous vibe. He suggests that they have a taste of the liquor. If that is the case, one of Moneybug's men helps Ponytail back up, and the boss and his men make their way upstairs. After the tension is toned down, Vlad heaves a sigh of relief, thinking about how he almost died a few moments ago. Later, he finishes, gathering all the broken candles and wondering how many the Ponytail broke. He's drawn out of his thoughts when Moneybug calls out to him, referring to him as a shining star. Look like the boss and his men are heading out after their discussion with George and Marcella. The man admits that Marcella and George had only good things to say about Vlad, and while claiming that he has also seen his potential, he asks him to come for him whenever he grows tired of smelling burned. He assures him that he would appreciate someone like Vlad working for him, but the loyal candle seller replies that he doesn't mind staying at his current job, especially since they pay him, feed him, and put a roof over his head. Hearing this Moneybug, he just laughs in response, pointing out that he can do the same and more, but seeing that Vlad wants to stay there, he tosses him a gold coin as compensation for the broken candles. Our hero is undoubtedly taken aback upon seeing it and responds that it's too much. The man with the hook still insists and offers him a lot more of those gold coins if he decides to work for him. After the mouth-watering offer, the man reminds the young man about his title, the Moneybug, and thanks George for the delicious meal before leaving with his men. Our boy notices that the intruder looked extremely cheerful and wonders if the meeting went well with the rest. That's when Zamina calls out to him from upstairs and informs him that George wants to see him later. We see Vlad, George, and Marcella in the same room. Vlad stares at something speechless, and as we see that it's a precious knife, George reveals that he was planning to give it to him later, but since the circumstances call for him to pass it over earlier, he's decided to give it to him now. He tells Vlad to keep the dagger with him at all times, and as the blue-eyed boy receives it, he can tell from the mood in the room that George's and Moneybug's conversation was most likely a total disaster. He looks all over the room and sees all the men brooding with low spirits. Even Marcella is in a foul mood, so he knows that some trouble is brewing. This is when George also tells Vlad that he should stop selling candles. Confused, the boy asks what else he should do if he can't sell candles, sensing his anxiety. George reveals that they got a tip about one arm. Jack brings people from the outside into the slums. He believes that the men are mercenaries who used to be knights, and Vlad chimes remarks that the men are just like George, with a worried look on his face. George confirms it, implying that he is afraid the thing is one arm. Jack already led an overwhelming number of dangerous men, but even then, the former knight. George was too much of an obstacle to overcome since he was like a wolf inside a flock of scared sheep. However, since Jack has brought in mercenaries and swordsmen who are individually as skilled as knights, The balance that kept everything together before has now been destroyed. George admits that they're already at a disadvantage and explains to Vlad why they need him on their side. Vlad, however, is surprised that they regard him so highly. George informs him that he will be given his first mission soon, and the information takes him so off guard that he's visibly dumbfounded and overwhelmed by the situation. Vlad thinks about Harbin, a disabled man without fingers who also lost his ability to walk, but against all odds, he used his clever mind to teach himself language in mathematics. Those were the skills that opened doors for him and allowed him to rise through the ranks. Now working under Captain Hoover, who uses Harvin as his role model, he realizes that he can learn through effort and that the knowledge will take him to higher places. While the young man is practicing with his wooden staff, he starts to hear a voice, suggests that he narrows the angle of his elbow as he swings down, and Vlad gets pissed off that the voice is back. I guess you're now wondering how he started hearing a voice in his head whenever he's training. Well, it all started 1 month ago, after he was struck by the jet black lightning. Ever since then, the voice, which he considers mnemonic whispers, starts echoing in his head whenever he holds a sword or something similar. Frustrated, he tries to block out the voice, claiming that he would first need to buy some holy water. Before even thinking about getting that sword from the blacksmith, he struggles to ignore it and decides that he won't reply to it at all. So he holds his staff again and tries his best to focus his mind and strength to strike down. But just when he's about to do it, the voice interrupts his thoughts, telling him to narrow the angle of his elbow. He accidentally listens to the voice and is surprised to see that the result of the strike is significantly better. In fact, he realizes that the strike followed the path of a sword. If he walks down the road that can turn him into a master, he feels as if he's holding a real sword and finally starts to wonder, has hell made its way into his mind? Is the voice in his head just a recollection of memories or a past life? Or has our hero been possessed by some kind of deity? And more importantly, how will this voice alter the course of his life? The scene shifted to somewhere in the cold, snowy mountains, and we see a man cleaning the blood off his sword. He talks about how one can't fool experience and admits that he can now feel how cold the winter air is in his bones. Judging by his outfit, the man is a knight. He hears noises coming from the bushes and surmises that someone is hiding in there. He smirks, as he suggests that the person hiding is either stupid or being stupid on purpose for trying to fool him. The white-haired knight walks towards the source of the noise and asks whoever is hiding to come out. There's a brief pause, and after a while, a voice replies to him, asking if he's Sir Stanga, the scar on his face. Knight sees the person and immediately identifies him as the one they call Vlad. After seeing his unique blue eyes and blonde hair, reveals that he's heard about the guy from the slums, especially because people have been talking about him a lot. He comments on his blue eyes and blonde hair, claiming that those who didn't know any better would think he's a noble. Vlad doesn't say anything about that, but just goes straight to the point of his visit. He gives Sir Stanga a sealed letter from his boss, George. The knight opens the letter, and upon reading it, a small smile of amusement appears on his face. Sir Stanger reads that the opposing organization has a mercenary who used to be a knight and finally understands why George needs his help. Seeing that the knight is on board, Vlad informs him that he will be his guide and suggests that they should arrive at their destination in 2 nights. Vlad turns around, expecting Sir Stanga to follow him, but the knight just teases him, claiming it wouldn't be a good idea to follow the lead of someone as stupid as him. Hearing this, Vlad explains that he's capable of at least guiding him back to meet George. However, Sir Stanga doesn't think so, so he tells the young man that there's no way he can be smart when he's doing something so stupid. Vlad starts to get offended, but the knight just looks back at him with his purple eyes. At this point, our hero doesn't know what to say to change his mind, but Sir Stanga finally agrees to follow him. However, he swears to kill him if he forgets any routes on the way back. Flat glares at the knight as well, but just tells him to try and keep up, explaining that he wouldn't want to screw up his first mission because of him. The blonde-haired guy turns away for the second time and begins walking, leaving the knight baffled that he didn't even seem intimidated by him, even when he intentionally made himself look threatening. And it amuses Stanga a bit, because he concludes that it's his boldness that makes George like him so much. The knight hasn't spent a lot of time with our hero, but he can already tell that he's a child worthy of being nurtured. Later that night, the duo stops at a small cave to rest for the night. They start a fire and just sit there in awkward silence. After a while, Stanga notices that Vlad keeps looking at him from time to time, so he gets uncomfortable and confronts him about it. He asks the young man why he keeps looking at him like it's his first time seeing a retired knight. The kid sheepishly admits that it is in fact his first time seeing one up close. Stenga asks Vlad if he's a country bumpkin, but in response, he asks the retired knight where he's from. Stanger tells him he's from a place called Decia, and Vlad exclaims, commenting on how that place is so country. The knight finds it a bit offensive and quickly changes the topic, reiterating his earlier threat to kill him if they get lost along the way. With a very mean look on his face, he warns Vlad not to lose his way and promises to slice him in half if he does. However, just like before, our boy isn't even slightly frightened. He just tells the knight not to say such scary things either way while unwrapping some beef jerky he brought with him. Vlad reveals that he once heard that all jokes made by knights are threats. Stanga doesn't even reply to him because he's more interested in the meat. He admits that it looks very fresh and asks the young man if his share is in there. Somewhere our hero responds that George didn't give him much and asks him if he doesn't have anything to eat. Stanger replies that he does reveal the few small pieces of meat he has as he looks at them in dissatisfaction. Vlad then puts his meat on sticks and begins to roast them with the fire. The smell is so good that Stanga's mouth starts to water just thinking about it. In his desperation, he offers to answer any question Vlad asks him in exchange for a piece of jerky, that it's a rare opportunity and urges him to grab it with a mouthful of meat. Vlad looks at him curiously, contemplating whether or not to take the deal. Eventually, he breaks the silence and blankly asks Stanga how many pieces of jerky he wants, explaining that he should just ask if he wants some. Stanga gets offended again, so he explains that his pride won't allow him to do so, and he reveals that knights only get something when they give something in exchange, implying that he isn't ready to compromise. Seeing this, our boy reminds him that he's a retired knight. However, Stanger reveals that he's gone by that belief all his days and isn't ready to change that. Now, in the end, Flag decides to ask him his name, and he responds. The kid then asks him his age, and the knight reveals that he's 42 years old. Stanga suddenly realizes that Vlad hasn't given him any meat in return for the answers, so he calls him a brat. Our hero just ignores him once again and proceeds to ask the next question. Asks the retired knight if he knows how to use aura. Upon hearing this, Stanga smiles and admits that Vlad only looks innocent on the outside because of how much he knows. Stanger then tells him that not all knights are able to wield aura and explains that using aura is a different thing entirely from just possessing it. Our hero senses that Stanga is trying to dodge the question, so he blankly asks him again whether he can use aura or not. The knight smiles and then hesitates, causing Vlad to become so anxious that he even offers to give him all the beef jerky in exchange for his answer. After wasting a little time, Stanger reminds Vlad that a knight should only take something when he's given something in return. As such, he decided to show him something special. He pulls out his sword and grips it tightly in front of his body. He then closes his left eye, which has a scar on it, and our boy asks him why he's closing it. Stanger responds, telling him that it's because he needs to bring forth his world from deep within his soul. With the eyes still closed and beginning to glow with a magical blue color, the knight tells our hero to watch him carefully. Just then, the sword begins to glow as well, and Stanga tells him that this is the essence of knights. The bright blue light starts beaming even more, and the aura shines so much that Vlad is forced to cover his face. Later that night, the both of them make their way to a city. The retired knight complains about feeling gross, but Vlad tells him that it's better if they look dirty and ambiguous than if they look like knights and draw attention. However, It turns out Stanger isn't even talking about his appearance. He laments that he's actually talking about his mood and explains that he has a lot of pride as a knight and doesn't like the idea of them passing through a hole. He asks Vlad why they have to go through there, so the guide explains that he was instructed to escort him back in secret. If they go through the main gate, their arrival won't be much of a secret. But even after Vlad explains this to Stanga, he still grumbles like a 5-year-old. The young man encourages him to keep moving and promises to prepare a bath for him when they arrive at their destination while walking through the secret passage. Stanga points out how quiet it is and admits that it bothers him. Vlad replies, telling him that the place is dead silent because it's that time of the night, and just then the two stumble upon something that shocks them. Before them are several dead men. Stang asks if the place always has things like this, and of course our boy responds that it doesn't. Looking at the corpses, Vlad figures that the men probably fought each other. He suddenly suggests that they split up and promises to tell Stango about the secret back door, which is used strictly by the members of his organization. Hearing this, the knight looks concerned about him and asks the kid where he will be going. Vlad then reveals that he will be passing through the main gate, claiming that it would be wiser to split up attention. As Vlad starts walking away, he tells Stanger that they will meet up later. After some time has passed, our hero arrives at the shop and is shocked to see that the place has been turned upside down. Then he sees a wounded George with bandages all over his body, and Marcella is standing by his side and tending to him. When the Horus Knight sees Vlad, he commends him for making it back safely. Unfortunately, he also reveals that Moneybug attacked them first. He had already anticipated that because he knows that those who hold money are usually on another level of strength. Asking him if he's okay, George admits that it's been a while since he went toe-to-toe with someone on the same level as a knight, and because of that, he ended up getting injured quite heavily. However, the former knight is less concerned about himself and more interested in whether he was able to bring Stanga with him. Vlad reveals that he found him, but that they had to split up because the main gate was being watched. He then adds that he told Stanger where the back door was and speculates that he should have arrived. By now, George is pleased with the news because he plans to attack Moneybug the next day and hopes to end things for good. He also asks why Stango looks so good, hoping that he's currently in fine shape. Our boy confirms that the retired knight is okay and admits that he looks like a good person too. Hearing this, George reveals that Stanga has a hearty side to him, and Vlad adds that he can also be quite nimble. The boss asks our hero if Stango looks like he lost weight, claiming that one needs to look after himself to live a long life. Vlad then reveals that he knows Stanga can use aura, and because of this, he believes they would be victorious in their battle the following day, rather than cheering. George is shocked by the fact that Stanger possesses such strength. That's when Vlad hears footsteps and figures that Stanga has arrived, but George calls him before he can leave, asking him if he's sure that Stanger was able to use aura. Suddenly, the former knight grabs his sword and tells the young man to get behind him. In a shocking twist, George reveals that Stanga doesn't know how to use such power, and before Vlad can piece everything together, the so-called knight appears with his sword and coat covered in blood. The apparent imposter tells George that he's come to a very far place before greeting him in a menacing manner, claiming that it's been a long time since they last sought each other. In a short flashback, we find ourselves back in the snowy mountains. It turned out that while the imposter was cleaning the blood on his sword, he was actually talking to someone he had just killed. Tell the man that he can't fool his age, and suggests that the winter wind may have gotten into his bones. It was at that moment that he heard the noise coming from the bushes and went out to find out that it was flat. In the present, we see the imposter wearing a sick grin on his face and telling George that he's changed a lot since the last time they saw each other. George asks him why he came looking for him now of all time, and in response, the imposter tells him that Count Gadar has passed away. George seems visibly shaken by the news. The imposter further adds that the news hasn't been publicly announced as a result of some complications, but assures him that soon everyone will find out. The annoying purple Iod Knight pours himself a drink and starts to mock the deceased count. Gadar raises the glass and toasts to the pitiful Count, well aware that it would get on George's nerves. Sure enough, George becomes furious, and as he curses at the impostor, he pulls out his sword and charges at him. The other guy unfazed and just holds the glass cup in the air as a way of taunting him, knowing that it would force him to try and attack him. Just when George is about to land a powerful hit on him, he dodges it so quickly that none of them can believe it. The attack shatters the glass cup with his sword, and everyone else is bewildered by how fast the impostor moved out of the way. He then toasts to the new Count, Sigmund, which multiplies George's anger by several folds. Not only did he mock the former Count, but now he hails the new and most likely corrupt one. The already injured boss turns around and swings his sword at the impostor called Gotten, but he blocks it with his own blade as the two clash swords intensely. Gotten reveal that Count Sigmund's first order is that the deserter knight named George should be brought back immediately. George declares that Sigmund is his lord, and so he refuses to obey him. He admits that the cow didn't expect him to return without a fight, nor did he hope for his safe return. The two powerful swordsmen go back and forth with their duel, but God improves to be a lot more agile. He dodged George's attempt to strike his feet before evading another powerful swing to his torso. As the fight gets even more intense, Vlad tells Marcelo that it isn't safe for her to be there while the heavyweights go at it. Vlad grabs Marcella and quickly leads her outside, helping her escape before she gets hurt. When they get outside, the men who are downstairs suddenly call out to Vlad, asking what all the noise upstairs is all about. Vlad spots Burley and immediately orders him to get all the men upstairs. At that moment, he also tries to explain the situation and inform them that their boss is in the middle of a deadly fight. But before he can complete his sentence, George is sent flying downstairs. Vlad and Marcella can do nothing but watch in horror as he plummets down below. The men downstairs are also too stunned to move, and they all watch George fall from the great height. Meanwhile, just when George is about to hit the floor, Garden bursts through the wall, wondering why George is still making the naivest choices ever. Finally, the boss crashes to the ground with great force, and as he lies there in pain, the men surround him, confused at what the hell is going on. Their murmurs are interrupted when poor George starts to cough. Cotton watches from above are the former knight's struggles to get back up, and his purple eyes glare at the boss as he waits to see what he will do next. Just then, a dagger is sent flying towards Godden's head, and it's not just any dagger, it's the one George gave to Vlad. Godden manages to block it with his sword just in time, causing it to bounce away and sink into the wooden floor. Vlad's blue eyes match Gordon's glare, and after a short staring contest, the knight charges at the injured boss with his sword as he jumps down to deal the finishing blow. Vlad yells for George to get out of the way before it's too late. The boss hears this just in time and musters the power to leap out of there before Godden can kill him. He manages to dodge the strike while the silver-haired knight sinks his sword into the floor afterward. George falls to his knees again and grabs his weapon. Godden gets back up and asks him why he didn't just follow the orders he was given in the past. George replies, telling him that he couldn't carry out such terrible orders because he's a human with a sense of honor. Hearing this, Godden corrects him, reminding him that he's a knight, not just an ordinary human. This makes George furious again, and he starts growling in rage. His men join him too, and when Godden sees that he's outnumbered, he decides that the night has dragged on for too long. The impostor closes his left eye and says that now he just wants to rest. Vlad sees this move and recognizes it, so he knows that Godden is about to use his aura. He runs as fast as he can, trying to stop him from doing it, but before he can get there, Godden's sword and eyes are already glowing, and the aura is activated. Blue lines start to appear on George and his men, implying that they are the targets of the attack. Unfortunately, they can't do anything to stop it, and the bright, powerful energy that is released blows back our hero and kills all of George's men. By the time the dust settles, Godden is gone, and all of George's men are lying lifeless, covered in blood. He groans as he gets back up and is horrified to see the result of what just happened. Everyone else is dead, and all we can see is George's face dripping blood to the floor. Vlad is broken when he sees his mentor's demise, and he remembers how George was the first to offer him a helping hand when he was just a boy rolling in the back alley dirt. The knight was the first to acknowledge Vlad when no one else saw his potential. As time went on, he became the strongest person Vlad had ever known. But now the strongest person had been killed. As the blue moonlight quietly approaches, we see God holding George's head in his hand. The imposter had beheaded the only father figure that our hero had ever known. Vlad stares at George's head, probably hoping that it's all a dream, but the more he looks, the more he realizes that his world has been shattered to pieces by this villain that he brought into his home, devastated. He grabs George's sword and yells another distraught, but just when he's about to strike with the sword, he hears the voice in his head telling him to stop at once regardless. He swings the blade with great force but gets easily dodged. Even if the attack wasn't a threat, the knight is shocked to see that Vlad knew how to swing in the sword path. He's perplexed because a gutter kid from the slums shouldn't know how to do that. I guess he doesn't know that this gutter kid was struck by jet black lightning, regardless of his curiosity. Gordon is impressed, and he admits it, unfortunately for him. Vlad doesn't care if he's impressed. He only cares about killing him. The enraged kid charges him for the second time, yelling at him to die. Just then, God blasts him with an attack, but Vlad manages to quickly twist his body and deflect it. He finally gets a hit, even making him lose his sword. The imposter gets back to his feet and is stunned by what he just witnessed. He concludes that Vlad must have been born with a gift and believes that it's the reason he was able to instinctively twist his body and deflect the attack. But even though the boy managed to deflect it, it's clear that his body got hurt from twisting and turning so quickly. He falls to the ground and groans in pain, but the voice in his head tells him to take it easy. It urges him to breathe and not to lose his focus. Flat holds the side of his stomach and continues to groan as he curls up on the floor. Godden watches the kid struggle on the floor and thinks about killing him. Now he contemplates snuffing out the light and potential Vlad possesses, but ultimately decides that it would be too much of a waste, even though he knows that the child could return with an even sharper sword, that he found pleasure in watching over those with great potential, and the memory pops a faint smile on Gordon's face. He calls out to Vlad, who's still wincing in pain. He tells him that a knight only takes a fair price, and a perplexed Vlad asks him what he's talking about. Suddenly Gotten tosses back 2 slices of beef jerky that Vlad gave him in the cave. He tells him that his name isn't Stanga, and he's not 42 years old either. He explains that the boy got an unfair price, which is the reason he's tossing back some pieces to. However, he declares that he will still be taking George's head back with him. He stares in horror once again at his master's bloody, severed head and listens as the imposter says that he will be taking it away because it's a fitting price for him as the victor. He says this with arrogance and pride, staring Vlad down and waiting for his response. The heartbroken kid is filled with rage and scowls at the imposter before vowing to kill him. He just scoffs at the statement and looks away in disappointment. He tells Lad that he shouldn't even think about asking for the second price for the beef jerky, especially with the way his life is at the moment. Flood stays on his knees and tries to stand up. At this point, he's gnashing his teeth and stuttering as he vows to kill the bastard who beheaded his master. But the imposter just ignores him and walks out of the shop, holding George's head like a trophy. Vlad yells his name, but he's ignored once again as the knight keeps walking away with a straight face. He finally walks through the hole he made in the wall earlier, and our hero warns him of the day he will come back to kill him. The devastated kid repeats his promise loudly, and for the first time since the story started, we see him shedding tears. His bright blue eyes well up and glow as he screams in agony with tears rolling down his face. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content. Leave a like or comment to help the channel out.